about this story, then you'd approach it scientifically. You'd ask for the information, speak to the witnesses, try and understand it. Because you're only left with one possible explanation after you've exhausted all the natural ones, that it may well be that God is trying to show through this person his passion. And in fact, part of this person's story is that Jesus does dictate to her profound theology. I've been present while it's happened, I've filmed while it's happening. It's an amazing story. But what is really great about it is the explanations as to why he's allowed man to see his passion are clearly given in one of the books that she wrote, which is on the Passion. So we were witnesses to that story. It changed Mike Willesee's life, but yet, oddly enough, to be people who report on this story, people want to burn the messenger because they say, we don't want to hear this story. You're mad if you believe in this stuff. But yet all we can do is present the evidence. I don't know whether that presenting evidence like this is an immediate pathway to lunacy. Please, if anyone sees any evidence of lunacy here today, tell me. But they are facts. That's what happened. You can see we took samples of the blood. It was obviously her blood. And then there it progresses. Then the following morning, those wounds, which anyone who's a medical person amongst you will know that with wounds of the size that she was demonstrating at 3 p.m. on that particular Friday, by the next morning had disappeared. If someone can make wounds appear somehow or other, how do they make them disappear is the next question. So that is an interesting story. Here are some instances where we've actually filmed the writing of her theological writings. Often have been there. She starts with a blank page and begins to write line after line, sentence after sentence, paragraph after paragraph, without pausing, without taking a moment to think. The writing is continuous. When you look at it, you say, the intelligence behind this writing is not the intelligence of the person with the pen. Many examples that I could demonstrate that is the case, but we haven't got time here now. Okay, now, all right. I want to now go on to the story of 2 Eucharistic miracles that we've been studying. This is the case of Buenos Aires, Argentina, 1996. The story is that a priest who was conducting Mass on the 18th of August 1996 in Buenos Aires, at communion time, a person came up and said, look, I've just seen someone drop a communion host in a candle holder at the side of the church. So the priest stops handing out communion, goes over, picks it up, he notices it's dirty. So he tells the Eucharistic minister to go and get a bowl of water, put it in the water, put it in the back of the tabernacle and lock it, which he did. 25th of August, 7 or 8 days later, the Eucharistic minister goes to see if the host is dissolved. Normally what happens as part of the church protocol is that if a host falls on the floor, the priest will normally consume it. But if it's dusty, he will allow it to, put it into water, allow it to dissolve, and then pour it down a special sink that is used to wash the vessels from Holy Communion. And so they'd put the host in water hoping it would dissolve, but when they went there a week later, opened the tabernacle, this is what they saw. You can see that the host is just visible, but there's a red substance was coming from the side of it. So they arranged for a professional photographer to photograph it on that first day. And you can see there in that side view, the host is quite visible, but yet there's this red substance surrounding it. Then they moved it, locked it up and put it into a tabernacle in the presbytery of the church. Then a week later they photographed again the transformation, and you'll notice there that the host is beginning to dissolve more and more red substance is coming. And from that side view you can see quite a dense form of redness, and the host completely disappeared. In 1999 we were given permission to do a scientific examination of the substance. We began by interviewing the priests involved with the story, the Eucharistic minister, And then we were able to take a tiny piece of it away for examination. That's what it looked like in 5th of October 1999 when we went there to take a sample. The piece was severed from it. There you see the tiny piece put into a test tube. It was then sealed, it was labelled. And then the first place we went to was a forensic laboratory in California. Their job there was to try and see if they could find any DNA profile. They found that the substance had the presence of human DNA but wouldn't yield the profile of the person from whom it came. I'll come back to this point a little bit later because that lack of an answer may be an answer, and I'll explain that in a moment. We then arranged for a section of it to be sectioned by a pathologist and for it to be examined. We brought it to a forensic pathologist in New York who is he's an associate professor at Columbia University, an author of a textbook on histopathology, who's a forensic pathologist and in particular a heart specialist. And he looks down the microscope at this slide, and we purposely didn't tell him anything about the origin of it. I mean, it's interesting when you go somewhere and you say, I'm a lawyer working on a case, I've got a journalist working there, well, they get the impression that it must be a forensic case. So I don't really add any more to that. I say, look, it's important, we can't tell you what it's about, it's an important case. So they always think, oh, it must be a criminal matter, you see. So otherwise you go there and tell them it's from, in fact, this is interesting, we did go to a place in Germany trying to get a DNA examination of this, and it was one of the best DNA labs we were told in the world. And we flew to Germany especially to see if they would do a DNA examination of it, and they wouldn't take the case on unless we told them what the origin. So Mike looked at me, I looked at him, I thought, well, do we not? We'll take a risk on it. So we told them. And they said, no way, we're not going to touch that. I said, why not? He said, well, if you're right, we have to close down half this university because we have faculties dedicated to atheism here. You know, the story of evolution, all this stuff. So, you know, you talk about prejudice. Here is a world-famous laboratory afraid to examine something in case the answer they don't like the answer. Anyhow, we didn't tell this gentleman anything about this case. And he's looking down that microscope. We're patiently waiting for him because he's an old gentleman. He's fiddling around there. We're thinking maybe there's nothing there. And then he comes out with it. He says, I can tell you exactly what this is. This is flesh. This is part of the muscle of the heart. It's the muscle that gives the heart its beat and the body its life. He says, there are white blood cells infiltrating this tissue. You can see all those little dots here. He says those white blood cells should not be there. They go to address trauma. He says those white blood cells tell me two things. One, that this heart was alive at the moment this sample was taken, because the white blood cells cannot exist outside a living body. And secondly, that this heart has suffered trauma. The blood supply has been to the heart. He says this heart has been injured. And then he goes on to say this. He says, this is the sort of injury I see in cases where someone has been beaten around the chest. Now imagine that. We've got a piece of the Eucharist being examined under a microscope, and this man is telling us a forensic picture which mimics the Passion of Christ in that Eucharist. So it's an amazing story. It's one that anyone can verify by looking at this slide. That's normal heart muscle, which is unaffected by trauma, and yet the white blood cells and the different look indicates that the heart has been suffering. The next case I want to deal with is this finding of heart in the Eucharist is not unique. Back in the 9th century in Lanciano in Italy, many of you are probably aware of the famous or classic case in Catholic literature of a Eucharistic miracle in Italy in a place called Lanciano, where in that case, and by the way, these are slides where the doctor was actually showing us the place from the heart where that muscle came. And so in the 9th century, a priest was consecrating Mass. He didn't believe in the transubstantiation, so the story goes, but during the time of the elevation, the bread turned to flesh and the wine to blood. That was what was believed, and it was not verified until 1970 when Professor Linoli in Italy from the University of Siena did tests on this then would have been 1,200-year-old sample. He found also that it was flesh and blood, human, and the flesh was part of the muscle of the heart, the same muscle as we found in the case in Argentina. Now, if you think this is a hard enough story to tell anyone, God has, it seems, given us an extra aid to be able to tell the story, because only last year did we find about this extraordinary case in Poland. In a place called Sokolka in Poland, the story is almost like a replica of what happened in Buenos Aires. And we went there last year